F it.
Do it live.
Oh, it's movie mood. Yeah, it's movie mood. Gonna talk about movies. Make it get kind of groovy. Whoa. Movie mood. Yeah. Welcome everybody to the second episode of season 2 of Movie Mood. This is your host, John Alberto.
And that was Alex Van Horn on the guitar.
Yes, your two hosts today. And today we're going to be talking Stanley Kubrick, one of the greats.
Oh, absolutely. And there is a lot to talk about with Kubrick.
Yeah.
Started out in the in the world of photography, and then really made some good stuff throughout the latter half of the 20th century, for sure.
Definitely. I think there's like so many different filmmakers you could talk about that are influenced by Kubrick. You can still hear me, right?
I can.
Okay, cool. Yeah, he's an important guy, and he's made some of the best movies of the 20th century, the late 20th century.
Yeah, for sure. So there's a lot to go into. Where's a good place for you to start, Alex?
I think we should talk about, because we both love this movie, but it's kind of it really is underrated, and I think is not talked about as much. And we can start forward, go backward, whatever, pop up anywhere you like. I know you just watched Barry Lyndon, which is very exciting because I love that movie.
Yeah.
But I thought we could talk Eyes Wide Shut.
Oh, I'd love to start with Eyes Wide Shut. Yeah, it's when Alex said we're starting backwards. It's Stanley Kubrick's. It's the last movie that he made before he passed away, and it was released in 1999.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So
yeah.
So let's see where to start. A kind of a psychosexual journey.
Yeah.
A man's journey through the night on one wild night, and the aftermath and how it affects his marriage. So lots of great themes there.
Yeah, it's such a cool movie. It's such a creepy movie too. I was just thinking, like, I remember I read this book about the making of 2001, and it talked about like how paranoid Stanley Kubrick is, and I feel like Eyes Wide Shut is like the most paranoid movie ever.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of tension there. Like even the scenes of Tom Cruise walking at night, you don't know what's going to happen, and I think that's very intentional. I think one of the things that Kubrick does as a director is his movies, just like everybody's movies, ultimately are about people and ideas, and you never know where life is going to take you. So, but even just walking down the street, he creates tension with.
I was reading something about in the books about 1999. Apparently, that the scene where Tom Cruise, I think maybe with the initial one where he's walking down the New York street, apparently every single shot is shot somewhere else. So it's supposed to have this like dreamlike feel. Like I think there's one shot that's like on a set, and then there's one shot that's in London, and then there's another shot, I guess, where it's like a blue screen and he's like walking on a treadmill.
Oh, no kidding. Yeah. Because I was going to say to you, like, as much as I love this movie, it's very surreal, and it does take place in New York City, but it does not look like New York City.
Yeah. And I don't think they shot in New York City at all. I think it was like London and then a set, and then yeah.
And I don't know if that was supposed to be kind of like a representation of the dreamlike aesthetic of the movie, but because any moviegoer would say it takes place in New York City, but that doesn't look like New York City. So I think it's kind of just even the setting of the movie itself is going into his whole aesthetic about.
Yeah, and that's one of my favorite things about Kubrick is like he was, similar to Christopher Nolan, this guy who big studios were throwing money at. I guess it was Warner Brothers also.
Yeah, he worked largely with Warner Brothers throughout his career.
Yeah, his big films, his epic films, and but his movies are very surreal, and I would say even more like surreal than a Nolan movie, because like a Nolan movie, it has that surrealism factor, but you can kind of figure out what's going on by kind of doing the math of stuff. But there's really no like logic to a lot of his movies. They're almost like a dream logic a little bit.
Right.
Yeah.
And it and it works in almost all of his movies. When you look at any of his movies, you can take a shot from the movie and it looks like a photograph. So he was a brilliant photographer before he was a movie maker, and it shows in the way that he presents his movies, like every single one of them.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and I think with Eyes Wide Shut, it's really cool because it's also like these big name actors like Tom Cruise, Nicole Kidman, Sidney Pollack, who's a big director, and it just has them in this movie like that you wouldn't see them do. Like you probably couldn't see, except for Tom Cruise in like maybe the '90s and the '80s. Like you probably wouldn't see Tom Cruise doing something like this nowadays.
it's not a director actor pairing that would immediately come to mind.
Hmm.
But it
Apparently they liked each other. At least from the book that I read, Tom Cruise was a big Kubrick head, and apparently grew up watching 2001 and all that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, and who of Tom Cruise's age, Tom Cruise born in the early '60s, wouldn't have been influenced by 2001?
Yeah.
So
Seriously.
yeah,
He's a big name, and I think it's also cool just that he was such an artsy filmmaker, but he was also a very commercial filmmaker at the same time.
yeah, he really was. He was certainly one of those event filmmakers, even though he wasn't. Even though he was very rarely rewarded individually with recognition like Academy Awards, Golden Globes, things of that nature. His movies were, especially later in his career, almost always recognized. So it's one of those things where people started out liking his movies, but their reputations grew over time.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. And then you have, I mean, just to name the movies he's done. So, what we're talking about. I mean, Doctor Strangelove, big movie. 2001, very big movie.
I think A Clockwork Orange was after that.
Clockwork Orange.
Yeah.
The Shining. I mean, these are like these, especially his later films. They're not, little indie flicks. These are like epic. Like each one was really epic. And I think that's kind of why I like Eyes Wide Shut, because it feels like it's kind of toned down a little bit, but it still has like a grand scope.
Right. Yeah, and I'm thinking about the financial side of me is thinking about what the budget for these movies must have been. I mean, he's working with these huge elaborate set pieces. He's working with actors at the peak of their career. I mean, Tom Cruise in the late '90s, Jack Nicholson in 1980. These are big name actors in their prime going to work for him. So
for sure. And I think that definitely comes from him starting out working with Kirk Douglas, who I read there's one director who was talking about how he thought Kubrick was basically like kind of a mediocre filmmaker who latched onto Kirk Douglas.
Interesting.
And then just had this really good career that just extended for a really long period of time, which I don't think that's necessarily true, but I think Kirk Douglas did, have a place in catapulting his career.
Oh, I mean, there's no doubt about the fact that Kirk Douglas played a role in catapulting his career, and my understanding is
Have glory.
Exactly. Yep. My understanding is they did have a falling out. Their relationship ended after those two movies. However, both of them are great in their own own way throughout the rest of the 20th century. So it's not like I don't think one of them made the other one better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think they're both, fantastic artists in their own right. And also, not to mention, he was always working with really great writers. I mean, he wasn't much of a writer himself. I think one of their big falling outs was for Spartacus, which was
Yep.
written by Dalton Trumbo. Um, Kirk Douglas, despite the anti-communist trials of whatever it's called, the Joseph McCarthy,
Joe McCarthy. Yeah.
Dalton Trumbo was blacklisted, and Kirk Douglas apparently said, "What should we do?" And Kubrick apparently said he would take the credit for it, and apparently that was like
Mm.
their big falling out. I don't know if that's it, but I'm sure Kubrick was a prickly guy.
I'm sure there's always more to the story.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so I often think about Kubrick as a visual storyteller, and that comes through in, I think, most predominantly in 2001, but in all of his movies. And then you're absolutely right. He connects with great writers, and actually, the majority of his works are adaptations.
Yeah.
But they don't feel like adaptations.
Mm-mm.
Yeah.
Nope. Yeah, I mean, you got Nabokov who wrote Lolita. You've got Jim Thompson who wrote two of his early movies, one of the great noir pulp writers. You've got Stephen King, um, William Thackeray, whatever his name, from Barry Lyndon, and yeah, I think it's cool that he always, and Arthur C. Clarke, of course. Um, there's always, it seems like he always needed kind of a jumping off point to go off and do his like wacky surreal vision.
Mm.
Um, yeah, I feel like I was thinking about this, talking to myself about it alone. Well, I feel like it kind of all that started with Doctor Strangelove, like that surreal comedy aspect.
Yeah, and we'll talk about Doctor Strangelove. And we talk about Kubrick as this grand filmmaker. All of his movies, which I watch regularly, are kind of funny too.
Yeah.
They are there. Yeah, and I think that really started. It was really kind of absurdist in Doctor Strangelove, and then his humor kind of got a little bit more subtle over time, but it's still there throughout.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, anything more to add on Eyes Wide Shut?
Um, Check it out. It's really interesting to watch because Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman were married in real life at the time, and they are playing a married couple in the movie. So it's interesting to so they work very well together. Um, in 1999, which we've spoken multiple times about being a huge year for movies, why do you think this movie didn't garner that much of a reputation?
I think it's kind of hard to define as a movie. Like, certainly it's surreal, and I don't know if I don't know if the market, if there's, unless you're David Lynch, there's not really a huge market for like surreal movies, and it's definitely offbeat. I mean, especially for people who might be going in to see a Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman movie. But if you know about Kubrick, I think Kubrick is the real star of that movie,
Mm-hmm.
and the detail and the scenes, and definitely the scenes with the cult, kind of make you later on, like, now that we know that Tom Cruise is know very involved with Scientology, it kind of has this side note aspect to Tom Cruise's career. But I don't know, it's a weird one, but you also think that if Kubrick kind of died in 1999, what would it have been? Because apparently he was constantly editing before movies came out, and he would test the movie on audiences at premieres and then change it up and edit things.
Right, and
So
there was a theatrical release of the movie, and then a slightly edited DVD release. So I have never seen the theatrical cut of this movie. I have
no,
seen,
I
yeah,
haven't either.
yeah,
Yeah, but
but
it's worth checking out. I love it, and
yeah, I
it's
love it
weird and
too.
it's funny.
Yeah, Wild Night.
Yeah, Wild Night with Tom Cruise.
Yeah. But if you watch the trailer for the movie, which is about a teaser that's only about a minute long, that's not what you're going to get in this movie. So just
Right.
yeah,
Yeah, it was advertised as one kind of movie, and it is a different beast.
yes, for sure,
So
for
which
sure.
one do you want to talk about next?
Um, we could go a lot of different ways with
Well,
this.
I'm curious as to your opinion of Barry Lyndon because you just
So
watched it.
I've only completed half of Barry Lyndon, but I love what I've seen of it so far. This
Nice.
character is such a rogue.
I know.
He's just he so far
Gangster.
he's just one of those other characters that's just going along, experiencing life around him.
It does make you think of Alex from Clockwork Orange a little bit, just because he's so like brazen and like violent and
right, and
doesn't give
that
he doesn't care at all.
he does not care.
Yeah.
The actor who portrays Barry Lyndon is a was a professional boxer.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yep, yep.
Oh.
So the fight scenes in the English Army when he gets into a verbal altercation with somebody, and they have a bare knuckle boxing match. It's pretty spot on. But yeah, he's another one who's going through life. And one of the things that I really like about this movie so far is the score.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
Kubrick was a big classical music head. I mean, some of the best use of classical music are in movies or in Kubrick movies.
right. And I thought I had heard actual compositions that I had heard in other movies, but I'm not sure if that was the case. Like
It's possible. I
yeah,
think a lot of times,
I thought I was hearing music from A Clockwork Orange in it.
it's
Yeah,
possible. Yeah, he probably owned the rights to Bach or whatever,
right.
certain Bach songs.
Yeah,
I love the first half. The second half is a different thing. It's it's sadder. You'll see. I don't want to
so I've
spoil
only
it.
seen the first half.
Yeah, the first
Yeah,
half is pretty great. And it's just like, yeah, I feel it's a unique movie. And the first half is definitely more about him just being like going through life and like trying to rise up in his life. And it's very beautiful, especially the shots that are in like the gambling scenes and all the landscape shots. It's
yeah,
almost like watching a moving painting.
exactly. Yeah, I was reading about this, and the shots that were filmed with candlelight as the only source of lighting, um, and that was the goal. Kubrick's goal was to make these scenes look as if they were paintings,
Mm-hmm.
like old paintings. So I kind of think about Kubrick's experience as a photographer in the 40s and early 50s, and I think I think when I kind of analyze that, I really see Kubrick as a visual storyteller who
Yeah.
has a great way of connecting with writers and and adapting work to tell a pretty spectacular story, both visually and through dialogue. So,
Yeah, mainly through I think visuals is his strongest suit. Like
oh,
motion
for sure, for sure.
visuals, especially that like the scene with the first duel that happens is really remarkable because there's like barely any dialogue, but you're just waiting for such a long time. But it's very at least for me it's very engaging. It's like a
Yeah,
spaghetti western.
the fear in the character's name was John Quinn. The fear in
Yeah,
John
was it the
Quinn's
captain
eyes. Yeah,
or
the
something?
captain. Yep.
Yeah, he's
Yeah,
great.
he
He's
was
fantastic.
he was terrified of Barry.
Yeah. Barry throws like a glass of wine at his face
Yeah,
at a dinner. He's just like,
a scoundrel.
I know. Yeah. Well, he doesn't get better, and that's another thing about Kubrick movies is a lot of his characters are not likable people.
No, no, absolutely not. And I think probably the most blatant examples of that are probably A Clockwork Orange and The Shining.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, in in A Clockwork Orange, in particular, the character starts out as a
Terrible person.
reprehensible human being, like
Yeah.
just absolutely repulsive.
Yeah.
Um, and and in the end, we don't know if he's much better off.
No, and I am really excited to talk about Clockwork Orange because I have a lot of thoughts about it, personally, and so I'm excited to get to that. Um, yeah, in fact, we can switch over and start talking about that.
Yeah, let's do it.
Clockwork Orange is really interesting. I haven't really watched it as much as I did probably in high school when I was watching a lot of Kubrick movies.
Mm-hmm.
But it is a really um, it's a fascinating movie for sure. But it's also like a lot of Kubrick's movies, it's kind of like it's trying to shock you or it's trying to be so extra that you can see how you can see why like it was super controversial and people hated it. And but I think even now I think it's more um prescient. I don't know, because in our day and age I feel like our society is more violent, is more like authoritarian, which is certainly a cyberpunk movie in a way.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Um, was this the first Kubrick movie that you saw?
No. Oh, I think it was probably Doctor Strangelove.
Okay, yeah. So for me, A Clockwork Orange was the first Kubrick movie that I saw. I bought a box set
Wow.
when I was maybe 15 or so,
Mm.
and I just watched them all in order. Well, I watched a little bit of 2001, and then I got bored, and my perspective on that movie has changed dramatically since then.
Oh,
2001's a
mine too.
masterpiece.
Yeah.
Um,
The first
so
time I watched it, I hated it. Yeah,
yeah,
I
of
was like,
course,
oh,
it
it's so
was
stupid.
so boring. Um, but so yeah, A Clockwork Orange was the first one I watched in its entirety, and it certainly raises a lot of questions about you know the role of government, what is appropriate action to take in something like criminal rehabilitation.
Mm.
You know, really, really pressing questions. So it's to your point, it is a lot more topical
Yeah.
than a lot of his other movies, which are incredible, but
Yeah.
they're not as tied into the real world.
Yeah. Have you read the book?
I have.
Yeah. Well,
A
there's
long
that
time ago.
last chapter that apparently Kubrick didn't read. He read the edited book apparently, and it didn't have that last chapter where he grows up basically and
Mm,
kind of gets rid of his droogs, and then he's kind of just lost. And in a way, that book, and this is the same thing I think for Lolita. It the I think the point of it is that it's supposed to indoctrinate you or to kind of brainwash you into liking the character or kind of um, feeling for the character who's a monster, basically.
yeah.
And the whole point of the book is kind of like to trick you, but it's also, especially Clockwork Orange, raises a lot of questions about um, the government and yeah, indoctrination in that way. And has he changed because he's been rehabilitated? And yeah, so it's an interesting movie for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And Malcolm McDowell gives a spectacular performance as.
Yeah, I think yeah, one of the best. If I think up there with Peter Sellers and Jack Nicholson in The Shining.
Yeah, and
I was also thinking, you know that show Tim and Eric?
mhm.
In that show, I feel like they take a lot from Kubrick, that kind of like demented dark comedy thing. Because there's also like there's a lot of funny moments in Clockwork Orange.
Yeah. Oh my goodness, there are a ton of funny moments in A Clockwork
Yeah,
Orange.
just weird stuff
Yeah.
on.
And going back to your point in regards to adaptations, um, I've raised the point that the majority of Stanley Kubrick's works were adaptations, but he wasn't afraid to veer away from the source material if it didn't
No, he
work.
did it a lot.
Yeah, he did it. He did it frequently, and
Yeah,
with that last chapter of with that last chapter of A Clockwork Orange. And my understanding on that is that there were two different versions of the book published. I don't know if
yeah,
it was I don't know if it was one version in the U.S. and one in the U.K. or how that
yeah.
worked with the
That
missing
felt sad.
chapter. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I think he has a story that he wants to present, and
Mm.
he is willing to veer away from source material. Like the source material is more of a starting off point versus what he's trying to remain completely faithful to,
Mm.
which I'm fine with.
Yeah.
I'm completely fine with that. I think it, going back to my point from earlier about, how they don't feel like, an adaptation of a book or what you will, like,
Mm.
like the Hunger Games or whatever,
Yeah.
it's, 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 uh, it's something that has a grand scope in it, and it's its own monster.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's its own beast.
Yeah.
But I like that aspect, and I guess Stephen King was pretty pissed off about The Shining because it's definitely its own thing. But and I don't know if you read the book for that as well,
I
but
did.
I think that a maze is way scarier visually than bushes that attack people. Or it was like lawn.
Yeah, it was the lawn, the hedge,
Yeah, the lawn hedges.
yeah, the
Yeah,
hedges that were shaped like
yeah.
different animals and stuff.
Maze labyrinth, way cooler.
Absolutely, absolutely, and you know, I love Stephen King. I love Stephen King books, but the Shining is a good, entertaining book. The Shining, Stanley Kubrick's movie, is quite possibly my favorite movie of all time. Like,
Yeah,
it's just two different levels.
dude. Let's talk about The Shining.
Oh my gosh, let's do it.
There's a lot. It's interesting because it's similar to the book, but there isn't that moment where Jack Nicholson's character goes like, "What have I done?" He's just like a crazy maniac throughout the movie.
No, there is no moment of redemption for him, and not going too into spoilers or for the book or the movie, but he in the book he starts as a very overall a very kind man, a loving
Yeah,
father to his son, a loving husband to his wife. In the movie, he's cold, he's sarcastic, he
he's already insane, and
he
they're just crazy for not noticing.
right. But yeah, so sorry, that was a cat.
But it's a really enjoyable performance because it's like total. It's what we think of when we think of Jack Nicholson. Just that
Yeah,
like, mm, yeah, like
yeah, and
all the Jackisms.
it's just this descent into madness, and and otherwise it's a very small cast. Obviously,
Yeah,
it's one of the aspects of the one of the major themes of the movie is isolation, and how that can affect somebody. But but it's not just Jack Nicholson's performance, it's Shelley Duvall's performance.
Yeah.
It's even the young child actor Danny Lloyd. That's the best child performance I've ever seen in a movie.
Yeah, and Carruthers,
Scatman Crothers, yep.
Kevin Carruthers. Yep. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's really only like four people, and there's a lot of questions about perspective and who's going insane, who's not insane, and certainly I think Shelley Duvall gives the best performance in the movie. Like she's terrified and terrifying.
Yeah, and I know I've brought this up in previous conversations that we've had, but Stanley Kubrick was very infamous for demanding hundreds and hundreds of takes.
Yeah,
Of
demanding a lot from his actors. I was listening to the Clockwork Orange guy talk, and it just sounded like he was basically getting abused. Like, just I guess he got his cornea scarred from certain scenes, and
mm,
I was also reading something where one of the stuntmen of 2001, he did like some stunt where they're falling, and apparently he almost died. And apparently he was gonna go like try to kill Stanley Kubrick, and apparently Kubrick like left the set right
oh
after the shoot.
goodness,
And the guy was like, I was like, he in a later interview, he was like, I was gonna kill him, but that was the best work of my career.
sounds like Herzog and Klaus Kinski a little bit.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely a workaholic. Probably a pretty difficult person to work with, but his movies.
Yep, yep, speak for themselves. And the performances that he gets out of his actors. Even though I think about his movies and I'm not sure that any of his actors won Academy Awards for their performance, but
Yeah,
they are the performances that moviegoers remember.
yeah. I think certainly I mean my personal favorite performance, maybe my two favorite performances are probably in Doctor Strangelove. But certainly the other movies also have pretty incredible performances.
Yeah,
All of them,
yeah,
really.
yeah,
And
and
also a really cool thing about The Shining, before we jump off of The Shining, but it's a really unique horror movie, and I think it really raises, probably similar to Stephen King's books, it really raises the level of horror because it in a lot of ways it can be a very cheap genre or has been.
sure,
But The Shining is a very elevated horror film, and I think he just elevated lots of genres: sci-fi, um, dystopian. Um, yeah, everything he did was just made better.
yeah, that's a great point. He didn't stick to a particular genre, but to what you just said, whenever he went into a genre, he made sure that he did it well.
Yeah,
It's I think about some of the horror movies that stand out to me. Movies like Rosemary's Baby, movies like The Shining. These are movies that they're not visually horrifying, and they certainly don't rely on jump scares. But
no,
I think one of the best things that someone making a horror movie can have is tension in their movie, and I think that even in Stephen King's non-horror movies, even in his sci-fi movies, even in his war movie, well, of course, there's tension in war movies, but he always has the tension high.
yeah,
Yeah,
and the level of how, I mean, the level of the filmmaking that's going on, and certainly in The Shining, there aren't any jump scares, but the mood and the ambiance and the music
yep,
is very haunting,
yeah, for
to say
sure,
the least.
for sure.
Yeah. I guess we could talk about which one do you want to talk about next?
I'm down with Doctor Strangelove.
Yeah.
You got your two favorite performances out of Doctor Strangelove. Are those George C. Scott and Peter Sellers?
Yeah, like those two performances are like the most quintessential performances from those guys. And I think yeah, it kind of started his because if you look at his early movies, they're well, I guess Lolita is before that. That's kind of a funny movie. There's some humorous, dark humor parts of it, but certainly Stanley Doctor Strangelove is one of his best usages of humor and a very dark subject: nuclear war, nuclear annihilation. And yeah, there's no better performances from George C. Scott and Peter Sellers.
Of course, yeah. And going back to you,
Or who's the guy who flies the plane?
who is that guy? That
Oh man,
I'll look it up.
yeah, but he's great. Yeah, he's perfect.
Yeah, and I don't know. When I look at Stanley Kubrick's filmography, Doctor Strangelove is the only one. While the majority of them are kind of humorous at times, Doctor Strangelove is the only one that I would categorize as a comedy.
Yeah,
And it's one of the best comedies ever. And he made a comedy about nuclear war. It's crazy. It's dark humor at its best.
yeah. I think that was the first Kubrick movie I saw, and probably the one I've seen the most.
Mhm.
That and maybe The Shining, and yeah, it's just a joy to watch because you've got so many good performances. Sterling Hayden is great. Talk about also a really interesting actor in that era of Hollywood. Sterling Hayden is like, who's the Sterling Hayden of our generation?
Mm.
Come on,
Now that I'm on the
that Sterling
IMDb
Hayden.
looking up his filmography a little bit, let's see where. Who's this? Okay, yeah, okay. Captain McCluskey and The Godfather. Yeah, yeah.
Yep.
Who is the Sterling Hayden of our generation? That's a great question.
Is it well, I think Sterling Hayden is such like when I think about him, I think of him as like the quintessential like greatest generation
Yeah, he's
type
kind of a
guy.
man of his time.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's definitely like a World War II generation, like chain smoking cigars, fought in
Oh,
Iwo Jima or whatever.
Slim Pickens is the
Yeah,
pilot.
yeah, and he's
Yeah,
amazing. It's one of James Earl Jones's first performances.
correct.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's just a good all around movie, and I think the first of his like big epic Kubrick pictures, where it was like he wasn't just shooting like a movie for Kirk Douglas or a low budget indie film. He was making like a big Kubrick production.
Right. Right. And and the interesting thing about this is that when I think of Doctor Strangelove versus the rest of his movies, we've been talking about his visuals.
Hmm.
I don't think about the visuals as much in Doctor Strangelove compared to his later movies. I think about the performances and the dialogue.
For
So, do you? I mean, there are some great visuals. The dropping of the bomb and Slim Pickens on.
Yeah.
Yeah, but 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 why do you think that could be? Why do you think his he became much more of a visual storyteller with 2001 and the movies after 2001?
Yeah, well, I think 2001 is, I mean, it's not my favorite, but it might be his greatest movie because it is such a purely visual film. And it's something that can't be, it's a film that couldn't be put into a book or you would have to totally change. Like, I haven't read the book, but I guess it wasn't really written. It was kind of collaborated with Arthur C. Clarke as they were putting it together.
That's my understanding as well.
Yeah. and it's a purely visual auditory experience, which made it so popular with, hippies in the 60s, people going to kind of trip while watching it, which would be terrifying also.
Mhm.
I don't know how they do it, because it is a very intense experience without anything.
And that's why you have to be in the right headspace to watch the movie as well. I mean, like like both of us mentioned, the first time we watched it, we were like, I'm not feeling
Sounds
this.
stupid.
Yeah,
That's not a
it
movie.
was boring, you know. But
Yeah, you kind of have to be ready for it.
yeah,
It's a whole experience.
yeah, for sure. And it's gorgeous. It's haunting. It's influential. Even the way the space vessels are designed is influential. I think about Interstellar and
Yeah, Interstellar certainly, and the cool thing about it is those models and the special effects, they still hold up
oh my
really well.
gosh, they look incredible.
Yeah, yeah, they don't look like. I guess a lot of it was just made with like paper mache and cardboard that like Kubrick did by himself in a garage in New York, which is insane. Like that last sequence where he's going through and becoming the Star Child.
Right.
Um, that's was just made in like a garage with his camera and stuff. But also, and this is where a lot of those conspiracy theories come from. He was using, at least I know in Barry Lyndon, he was using lenses from NASA for his candlelight shots. And I think people from NASA were apparently visiting the set of 2001 and were like consulting him.
Mm. And what Alex is, of course, alluding to is the conspiracy theory that the moon landing was faked
Right.
in, and many people believe that Stanley Kubrick played a role in filming a fake moon landing. And if you're
Right.
interested in such conspiracy theories, there is a documentary about The Shining, actually worth checking out, called Room 237.
Yeah.
But yep.
Yeah. And there's certainly people have dug a lot of stuff from Kubrick. And Kubrick is so like, I don't know. It's so surreal, and it doesn't really, his movies don't really give you answers. So it's almost like a breeding ground for like conspiracy theories. You're like, oh,
Sure.
this means this. And it's like, I don't know. I think it was just a creepy visual. He chose it because it's moody. There wasn't really a specific reason
Yeah.
behind it. Maybe there was. I don't know.
But going back to that, I think about like sci-fi movies of the time, and to your point, the visuals and how they
Yeah.
still look masterful today. And I compare that to other sci-fi movies, and the one that sticks out to me is maybe like Planet of the Apes or something. And Planet of the Apes is a good movie. It's good
Yeah.
sci-fi. There's cool themes in it, but visually it does not stand the test of time the way a movie like 2001 does.
No, it's definitely way campier than
For sure.
2001. And 2001, like a lot of Kubrick movies are very campy. Very very campy. But 2001 does not feel campy. It feels very like serious.
Yeah.
Very, it is what it is.
Yeah. And there isn't a lot of humor in 2001.
Nope.
Like like not even really subtle humor.
No, it's kind of cold.
It is kind of cold, and I
Well, that's Kubrick movies also.
it's
Though.
it's cold characters in a very warm, visually appealing world, which is
Yeah, it's a beautiful film.
yeah.
Very 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 beautiful. And also, if you think about it, 2001 is kind of one of the first movies, uh, first sci-fi movies that kicked off like a long run of really good sci-fi movies. Because I guess in early 20th century, halfway through the 20th century, the big popular movies were in America at least, were westerns.
Hmm.
But then afterwards, from the '60s onward, that kind of became sci-fi.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think about, I don't know how familiar you are with the Star Trek filmography that much.
I've
Like,
been actually trying to rewatch Star Trek recently.
nice. Yeah, but Star Trek: The Motion Picture was released a few years after 2001, and you can certainly see influences of 2001 in it.
Right.
It's much more cerebral. A lot of it more about the experiences of and the broader questions of humanity versus the day to day of the Enterprise that you would get
Right.
in later Star Trek movies.
Yeah. Yeah, they got goofy. I haven't seen Star Trek the motion picture in a long time, but Wrath of Khan is a big, yeah.
Yeah, people
Mostly,
love Wrath of Khan. I like Wrath of Khan.
yeah, so
Yeah.
good. So
Yep.
cool. That was another like movie I think that traumatized me with the
Yes.
ear scene.
Yep.
Terrifying. Yeah. But 2001, it's definitely up there with his best movies. It might be his best movie. I think a lot of people think of it that way, but I think there are other ones that for me, yeah, you do have to be in the headspace, and for me Doctor Strangelove is more fun.
Right. And it was the only movie for which Stanley Kubrick himself received an Academy Award, and that was for
Oh, I didn't know
visual
that.
effects. Yep. Which is, when you look at the visual effects of 2001, it's incredibly well deserved. I
Yeah,
think
for
even
sure.
even today, even in 2021, a movie like 2001 would be in the running for a.
It holds up to a lot of that CGI stuff. It's yeah, it doesn't look corny or old. It still looks like it stands the test of time.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So which ones have we not talked about? The
We
Kubrick
haven't talked.
category?
Yeah, we haven't talked about his very early works. We haven't talked about Lolita.
Full Metal
We haven't talked
Jacket.
about Full Metal Jacket.
Let's have Full Metal Jacket. I think
Okay.
it's actually I think it's probably this is like terrible to say because it's a great movie, but I feel like it's one of his lesser. For me personally, I feel like except the first half is up there, but for me, it's one of his not one of his best, but still unique.
It is unique. It's definitely unique in the genre. Um, so we've talked about Stanley Kubrick genres, and now this is his effort at a war film.
Yeah, well, he made two war films, two anti-war films, so I guess it's his second technically.
Okay. Yeah.
Paths of Glory.
Yep. Yep. Um, and it has two very different halves. The first half being a bunch of Marines in boot camp before being sent to Vietnam, and then the second half being those soldiers in Vietnam afterwards,
Yeah.
and the two halves are very different. And I think one of the halves is better than the other, but
Which half?
the first half,
Oh yeah, of course.
yeah, the first half is better.
Yep.
It's R. Lee Ermey, who plays the drill instructor, the drill sergeant in the movie, was in fact a drill sergeant. Prior to going into acting, and Stanley Kubrick discovered him, I guess. And then he went on to have his own movie career after that.
A TV show career.
Yeah. But I think you get really great performances out of Matthew Modine and Vincent D'Onofrio as well.
For sure.
For sure, Vincent
And
D'Onofrio.
yeah, I know you feel bad for Vincent D'Onofrio. And I feel like the first half is almost, it kind of harkens back to, and maybe the second half too, harkens back to Clockwork Orange and that like indoctrination
Mm.
by people like creating murderers or creating killers. And definitely, the first half shows you that. It shows you how like, you know, the military trains people to become soldiers, and it follows that line. And Arlie Ermy is pretty incredible. He says some pretty incredible things to his recruits. Um, Pretty insane dialogue.
Yeah, and my
And
understanding is a lot of that dialogue, which seems very out of the norm for Stanley Kubrick, was ad libbed.
yeah, I think it was actually like really what he would say to recruits. And I guess the military, it's kind of changed its training since Vietnam, which I think was probably pretty intense. But yeah, he says some pretty wild stuff to people.
Right, right.
Yeah. And then the second half is kind of following them around Vietnam, and it's good, but I think when you compare it to other Vietnam films, you can tell it's not realistic, but also it's a Kubrick movie, so it's not really important that it's realistic.
Yeah, I don't think it has to be realistic, and that's okay. I think that I believe it was the previous year Platoon was released,
Yeah.
Oliver Stone's Platoon, and then the following year, Born on the Fourth of July was released, another Oliver Stone movie.
I didn't know
So
that too.
yeah, it kind of got overlooked between
Yeah.
those two, which were much more realistic portrayals of the war.
Hmm. Yeah, and it is a good movie, but it's the one I guess I don't think of as like his great movies, but I feel like it's very good. It's a very good film.
Yeah,
Do you
as
agree, or what do you think?
I do agree. As bad as it sounds, it's probably the one where I would maybe go on YouTube and like type in a scene that I want to watch from the movie and watch that scene, but
Yeah.
I wouldn't, watch the entire movie.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. But it's a good one. Yeah. What about? Well, I guess we could talk about Lolita.
yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, Lolita is a. It. I feel like it's him getting ready to do something like Doctor Strangelove or any one of the big uh films that he did, but it's not. He's not there yet.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I I saw Lolita after I saw pretty much all of his movies that were released after that, with the exception of Barry Lyndon. And you're right, it's building up. It's building up, kind of that dark humor element, kind of that surreal element as well. But it's not quite as pronounced as you see it later in his filmography.
Yeah, and you could certainly see Kubrick's influence on people like David Lynch, who I guess have talked about how Lolita is a big influence, and it definitely has that like David Lynch theme of like the suburban family, but something is wrong. Something's very wrong
Right.
with the suburbs sort of
Mm-hmm.
thing.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
it's
I haven't seen it in a while.
yeah, it's been some time since I've seen it as well. And I know another adaptation of the book was made in the late '90s with Jeremy Irons. Have you seen
That's
that
right.
one?
Yeah, I have not. No.
Okay, yeah.
I did read the book a while ago and thought it was very. I could see how Kubrick would be probably interested in it.
Yeah. Before we wrap up, have you seen any of his short films from the '50s?
Yeah, they're interesting. They're very. I mean, they're very visual, like mainly visually minded, and I guess it kind of shows you that he really depended on writers to help him get a jumping off point. Yeah, I've seen him. Um, One movie we haven't mentioned, which I think is really worth mentioning. Well, both movies. Have you seen The Killing or Paths of Glory?
I have not.
Dude, they're very good.
Okie dokie. On my watch
Definitely
list.
yeah.
Yeah.
Paths of Glory is was created by, well, it inspired the guy who made The Wire. So apparently there's a lot of Paths of Glory in The Wire. So
Interesting.
yeah.
Yeah. And
It's a good film. I think it also has one of the only very sympathetic characters, like truly sympathetic characters in Kirk Douglas. I guess in Spartacus too. But those two characters are really just people who are being, crushed by their circumstances versus all the monsters that are in his
right,
movies.
right, absolutely. I think one of the things we've talked about a lot during this podcast is the performances he gets out of his actors. It should be noted that as we're moving back into the 50s, that one of Kubrick's main influences was Kazan. And so, yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. And so I think, when I look at, some of the movies that he made, movies like On the Waterfront and East of Eden, and the performances that he got out of, Marlon Brando and James Dean. I think about the performances that Kubrick gets from his actors later in his career, and it's interesting to see, how that influence was there.
Yeah, definitely in The Killing and Paths of Glory, you can see that. It's way more dialed down and way more realistic. But I think as he got older, it became more about creating surreal images and creating things that were not necessarily realistic, but were like Jack Nicholson's performance in The Shining is it isn't realistic, but it's pretty fun to watch. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Very histrionic. Yeah.
For sure.
But in a good way.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, definitely check out those two, The Killing and Paths of Glory.
Nice.
Yeah.
Will
and
do.
Spartacus also, although it's very like, you don't feel like, at least I don't feel like it's a Kubrick movie, even though it is.
Neither do I, but I like it.
Yeah, it's still good. Yeah, it's still a great movie.
Yeah, I like it very much.
I'm hard pressed. I don't think he made a bad movie, other than maybe the stuff he made when he was starting out.
Right. Yeah. So I think we can go out on a limb here and say we both like Kubrick as a filmmaker. Would you?
Yeah.
Would you agree with that? Okay. Yeah. Kind of iffy there, but yeah.
Yeah. Certainly controversial, but also, yeah, one of the best.
No, and so influential, so incredibly influential on Spielberg, on
Paul Thomas
Anderson, anybody. So influential on anybody who makes movies.
Tarantino for sure. Yeah, like just name a film director, and they're taking something.
Yep. For sure.
Well, cool. Well, I think that it concludes our Kubrick talk. Oh, and who are we gonna talk about next time, John?
Ooh, I have some ideas in my mind, and I will keep people surprised.
Yeah, I've got some good ideas too.
All right.
Check in next time for another episode of Moviemood. We are your hosts, Alex and John. Later, Gator.